So, what is loneliness? We've all experienced it. It's all of us have been affected by loneliness. But how do we understand it? Where does it come from? What are the risk factors? And if we have loneliness or we know someone with loneliness, how do we help? What are the things we can do? I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Mind, Mood, and Medicine. This is the podcast where we consider issues such as the human experience and look more closely at ways that we can perhaps deal with some of the challenges of our lives. I'd like to welcome my colleague to the discussion, Dr. Michael Smith. How are you, Mike?
I'm just fine today, Mark. Good to be with you.
I think it's an interesting topic, and I think you were discussing some days ago about just how important and serious of a topic this is. Do you have any specifics to start us off?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this, Mark. I think this is a topic that is maybe easily overlooked, but I think it's important that it be addressed individually as well as a society. Um, this issue of loneliness, and before we get too far, I trust that you will just make a distinction between loneliness and once in a while being alone. I don't know that they are the same thing, but um, I put some thoughts in a book a while back, and I wrote some on relationships. And I started with this quote from Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General at the time. This is back in 2023. He wrote, "Our epidemic of loneliness and isolation has been an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individual and societal health. Our relationships are a source of healing and well-being hiding in plain sight, one that can help us live healthier, more fulfilled, and more productive lives." So, this issue of loneliness has risen to the point where the Surgeon General, even recently, has recognized that it's a major health issue that needs to be addressed. Kind of related to that, I have a quote here from Mother Teresa. She stated, "The greatest disease of the West today is not tuberculosis or leprosy. It is being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. We can cure physical diseases with medicine, but the only cure for loneliness, despair, and hopelessness is love. There are many in the world who are dying for a piece of bread, but there are many more dying for a little love." I think that's a profound statement that Mother Teresa made, and I think she's actually fairly accurate that the effects of loneliness can be life-threatening in some cases. They can
Yeah,
impair health. Tell me what your thoughts are, Mark. Take it away, please.
yeah. Well, again, we're both medical doctors and trained as psychiatrists as well, and trained in neurology. We're aware of brain function and the interface of the biological person and the psychological person. We know from actual medical research that loneliness, chronic loneliness, has been linked to the risk of cardiovascular diseases like heart attack, higher levels of inflammation, and all the medical conditions that go with uh, excess inflammation, a weakened immune system, increased risk of mental health issues like depression and anxiety, and also cognitive decline and a higher risk of dementia. We've just made it through this COVID challenge several years ago, and it was impressive the health consequences of COVID, not so much from respiratory infections, although, of course, that was the major focus. But I think in retrospect now, there was as big a consequence mental health wise and cognitive wise. There were studies that showed that there was an acceleration of the decline of cognitive disability in the elderly, for example, very significant, really pointed to the heart of the issue that human beings need companionship and they need a connection that's meaningful.
Can I, if I may just add a little bit to that, the next time we have a major crisis like that, where we have an infectious disease doctor telling us how we need to behave, my recommendation for society and for the government is that in addition to having expertise from an infectious disease or pulmonology perspective, that we have a behavioral scientist in the mix as well who can anticipate some of the fallout from those things. And my casual observation of what happened during COVID is we had all of this alarm, and I don't dispute the need for being cautious, but we shut so many things down, and I don't know that there was a lot of consideration given for the psychologic fallout from that, with kids
Sure.
falling behind in education and this epidemic of loneliness being amplified by having a lack of awareness about that. So anyway, I interrupted you, Mark. I apologize.
No, I was just going to say the psychology, the mental health side of illness or illnesses is a lot of times either considered a softer science or perhaps not the priority. Whereas now we realize it should be always a consideration and upfront when it comes to public health issues. I think the general population has become more aware of that with the suicide epidemic and also some of the information we have about the loneliness of young people and how impactful that can be to their life and the risk of suicide in young people. Let me make a distinction here that I think is important, and
Please.
that is that being alone is not the same thing as loneliness. Loneliness is a complex emotional and psychological state and a feeling of social isolation and the lack of connection or meaningful relationships. And a person can be alone, be by themselves and not lonely and not have loneliness. And also, it's certainly the case that people can be surrounded by many others, the so called loneliness in the crowd. People can have a lot of contact, and many young people have a lot of connectedness, but that doesn't necessarily protect them or keep them from the experience of loneliness. So let me just talk about where it comes from a little bit. There are evolutionary, neurologic, hormonal, psychological roots for loneliness. So, in other words, we talk about this as a psychological state, but really it's a biological state as well. And humans are inherently social beings. And it seems to be part of either our survival mechanism or the way that we've adapted in history that we do better when we connect to people. And loneliness signals a lack of the social bonds and connection that really are healthy for us. And loneliness actually affects the activity in the brain. You can see it in the way in which functional MRI shows the use of neurotransmitters and oxygen and so forth in the brain. There are effects on the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, which has to do with judgment, has to do with memory, and you get hormonal changes with loneliness too. Increased cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that can result in a number of secondary medical illnesses and risk of illnesses. You get heightened states of anxiety and negative emotions, and you also get dopamine and oxytocin deficiency. And these are some of the neurotransmitters that help us feel satisfaction and feel connection. And so those are some of the realities of what it's doing to our brain and to our body. But we also can end up creating an increased risk through our own thought patterns. You can develop negative thought patterns that are self reinforcing thoughts, such as I'm unlovable, no one cares about me. And it gets into a vicious cycle where you might withdraw. And yeah, people are going to be less likely to reach out to you if you are self isolating or anticipating ahead of time that you won't be able to make a connection. Social anxiety and rejection sensitivity also, for some people who are maybe more at risk of those kinds of um, behaviors, that's an increased risk for them to develop serious loneliness. So, in any event, it's a serious condition, as the Surgeon General has identified. It is a multi system uh, impact to the human person, psychological, medical effects, cognitive effects. And I think we need to pay close attention to it and understand what we can do for ourselves and maybe what we can do to help other people we know and love.
Yeah.
So there are some ways to overcome, but you've worked for many years as a practicing physician. You've been in a setting where a discussion of uh, of social connections and meaning of a person's life were part of the topic of your therapy. What kind of things did you learn, Mike, in your experience as a therapist and as a physician?
Well, thanks for that, Mark. One of the thoughts I have as you're talking, I like your comment about you can be surrounded by people and be very busy and still be lonely. Um, and I think part of the reason for that is people need to learn to listen. I think one of the ways we can help each other to not be so lonely is to develop the ability to listen. And from a psychotherapy point of view, I believe listening is one of the powerful skills that psychotherapists have. And one of the things that novice therapists might do, might impair the progress of their client or their patient, is the patient presents a problem, the therapist has the solution, and the therapist doesn't really hear what the patient or the client is saying. And I think learning how to really listen is a valuable skill that is both enjoyable for the person being listened to as well as the person doing the listening. And to seriously listen like that means you kind of suspend your judgment, suspend your comments, suspend your diagnosis until you've heard the story. And it's
I think
not just a matter. Please.
add on something that it fits ideally with that. You know, as a psychiatrist too, I've been asked by people, "Well, what do I say to a friend that's having difficulty or maybe is lonely or is suffering some loss or grief?" And so often, I think the best answer is not worrying so much about just saying the right thing or having the right reaction or trying to overthink what you can say. The best thing you can do is to be an open listener and a caring listener and really more thoroughly understand and ask more about the experience. I think that that's that's the key to being a good therapist, but I think it's also the key when you're not in a professional circumstance, you're just in a friendship circumstance. You know, what do you do? Well, you listen, and that really helps bridge that gap and help that connectedness in the sense of really being needed and wanted.
Right. One of the things that I was taught during my training at some point, and I think you probably heard the same thing, is the idea of don't just do something, sit there. Just flipping that common phrase around,
Sure.
because so often we feel like we have to move in and fix the problem. And I have nothing against fixing the problem, but sometimes people just need to be heard and they need to not be alone in the midst of their trial. And life is going to give us all opportunities to be alone and struggle and have to come to terms with whatever the issue is, health wise or otherwise. It's a blessing and a comfort and a service to others if you can leave someone who's struggling with something not all alone, even though you can't fix their problem. And that doesn't mean you're intrusive. What I'm suggesting is that you tune in to really what they're feeling and needing. And it's not just what you're hearing. I think true listening involves more than hearing. You have to observe, you have to learn to empathize, you have to resonate with the person that you're with. And I think if you can really do that, your own life is going to be benefited and you're going to be a benefit to that person. You're not
Absolutely.
yeah, you may not solve their problem at that point, but you're giving them power to do better themselves. Go ahead, please, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let me kind of outline some ways that we might be able to overcome loneliness. And where you were speaking specifically too of helping somebody else, but I think many of us have loneliness ourselves, and we need to perhaps understand what are the things we can do. And I'm going to give a couple categories and then go back and maybe we can talk about each one. Strengthening social connections is important. Changing thought patterns, negative thought patterns, is another strategy. Enhancing emotional well-being, mindfulness and various techniques that can do that can be useful. Improving physical and mental health, it's surprising how much they are related to a state of emotional well-being. And using technology wisely, because I think technology may be able to help us, but in many instances, I think has contributed to the loneliness epidemic. So let me just touch on those, and I'd like you to chime in here on your experience and what you think, Mike. Strengthening social connections, we've already pointed out that just having more connections doesn't necessarily answer the need. But I think reaching out to others, meeting up with friends and family, people that do mean something to you and are not just casual surface interactions, but interactions that are more a little more meaningful. And I think all of us probably know some folks that don't particularly produce that sense of companionship and connection. But if we can reach out to those and build more relationships, take somebody to lunch that shares some interests that you might have, for example. Uh, join a social group or club that related to your interests, something that you're connecting in a more meaningful way, just in a casual, superficial way that so many of our interactions tend to be in this modern society. And taking some social risks to initiate a conversation, attend a gathering, being open to some new friendships and connections. It's surprising there are a lot of other people out there just like you, so to speak. I think that's one thing we know from our psychiatry practice. A lot of times our patients feel like they're the only one that feels a certain way. They're the only one that's lonely. They're the only one that worries about what's going to happen next, so to speak. And I think that there's so many potential friends, potential people that could add to your life that are available. Some of it may take a bit of a risk, and which is a catch-22 if you already are feeling down and maybe not uh, very strong emotionally, but it sure can be worth the risk to reach out. What do you think about social connections and ways that we can do better, Mike?
Well, thanks. I agree with you. I think it's very important that we nurture those relationships. Um, I think there's a physical principle of inertia where if you get, I think it was Isaac Newton or somebody that said an object at rest tends to stay at rest. And I think that's true for physical objects like rocks and other things, but it's true for people as well. I think we can get in our comfort zone. We can, even though we're not happy about it, we're familiar with it and we have inertia. The other side of inertia is an object in motion tends to stay in motion. And I think once we push against that initial inertia that keeps us sitting still and venture out, like you're suggesting, making some new social connections, maybe pushing against our comfort zone a little bit, that inertia tends to perpetuate itself as well. And you can continue to get some benefits from that willingness to push against that. Um, and I think you've underscored this already, but I just want to say again, I think it's important that we look at our own place when it comes to loneliness. Is this something that we need to address in our own lives? Hopefully, we're not having too many troubles with that, but I think it's nice to look around us as well because like Mother Teresa said and Dr. Murthy said, there are a lot of people who are suffering, in silence, and they might be our next door neighbor, they might be a parent or a relative that we haven't had contact with, a sibling, and, it's okay to, like you said, initiate a phone call or a contact or even write a letter. Um, I do think that the social media that we have, gives us an ability to have some connection, but I think that's a start and not an end. I think there needs to be more than that.
And, I think there's some great opportunities. For example, older people don't always have as much facility at, connecting by Zoom and FaceTime and so forth, but it is possible, especially at times with the assistance of the younger generation, to be able to connect with friends that live at a distance and family members that are important. So I think this technology can do much to bridge the gap for some people, but it also can be part of, I think, a lifestyle that a lot of us can get sucked into of rapid activity and lots of superficial relationships or connections, maybe sometimes things related to job. And, they're obviously, we can't always choose exactly the people we want to be in our life at any given moment. But I think we also are faced with getting involved in activities that may look good to other people or may or we think or seem important or whatever, but we're not really hanging out with the folks and really experiencing the companionship that we truly need or the growth as a person either. So that's kind of a reassessment that can be part of our current social connections. What kind of reward are we getting? What kind of meaning is there in our current uh, um, relationships? So let me talk a minute about thought patterns. There's an area of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy that kind of takes this understanding to a high level that there is an important reality to the way in which people approach or think about a situation, and they get into a thought pattern that may keep them locked into a certain emotional state, including depression or anxiety, when a more broad review or a reconsideration of the reality of their circumstance uh, would lead them in a different direction. And let me just say, as an example of what I'm trying to express, you can get self-defeating beliefs. You've had some disappointments. Maybe somebody left that you cared about. Maybe you moved to a new town. No one really reaches out to you right away. You can start to think in terms of self-defeating beliefs. Well, no one cares about me. Makes sense that no one's reached out to me because I'm not a person of that great a value. I'm not an interesting person. I don't have a lot to say. I think these are examples of problems with self-defeating beliefs and essentially bad thinking, if you want to express it that way, or at least they're perspectives that are not an absolute truth. And I think in serious cognitive behavioral therapy, those kind of negative thought patterns are challenged, and 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 a person who learns to kind of stop and reassess. When my mom calls me all the time, seemingly without much uh, real need to call, and is she just trying to bother me and be important or something, or what's the reason for that, or doesn't she trust my judgment or something? And the real reality is maybe mom's lonely and is trying to reach out for some contact, but feels like she needs an excuse to
Right.
contact a son or daughter, that kind of thing. So in
Mhm.
any event, I think the need to reassess thought patterns and to reconsider, that one might have gotten locked into a negative circumstance because of expectation and self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just underscore what you've said. I think people do get into these mind games where they are interpreting the the way I used to phrase it to people is they would see reality, but they're seeing it through colored glasses. So it's not like a psychotic disorder where your mind is creating things that aren't really out there, but you're seeing reality, but it's got a dark hue to it. And I think recognizing that, I think gives a person the ability to combat that and consider the other possibilities. And that's a lot of what cognitive behavioral therapies is about is understanding your automatic thoughts. We all have them. Sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not. But I think challenging, questioning those automatic thoughts and considering the other possibilities and learning to maybe run with those. The other comment I had, Mark, I think you mentioned this early on, the difference between being alone and loneliness. Those are not exactly the same thing. I think you can be alone and not have loneliness. And in fact, I think there's a lot of value to having alone time, quiet time, time away from other distractions and the noise of life, where you can kind of get a grip on your thoughts and your perspective. That actually
Absolutely.
might be a time where this cognitive behavioral kind of thinking might come into play as well, where you can be quiet, you can think it through and come up with some other things. I do think there's value in quiet time as well, and that's not meaning that you're lonely.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a great bridge into one of the topics again that I had mentioned earlier, and that is improving physical and mental health, uh, or pardon me, enhancing emotional well-being first. Uh, you know, and some of the ways in which one can enhance emotional well-being is to practice mindfulness and meditation, keep a gratitude journal. These are not necessarily social techniques. You're not reaching out or looking for some other uh, person necessarily, but things you can do for yourself that can enhance your sense of well-being and completeness and give you reinforcement for the human person in a way that's important too. Engaging creative activities is another example. What's exciting to see in some people is that they start with one technique. For example, they're kind of isolated. Maybe some friends have died. They're an older person, but they've always thought maybe I could take up some art, or I'd like to try something at least. Maybe I'm too old, but I'll try it. And they go out and go to get an art lesson at a studio, and they start enjoying the self-expression and part of themselves that they'd never developed before. But then secondarily, they start making connections with other people and having the kinds of friendships that can really grow when you share a common interest. So I think you're exactly right. You can be alone and build yourself up, where you can be alone and essentially be treading water without reinforcing a sense that you're valuable and that you're meeting your own needs for completeness. So some of the work that can be done, some of the techniques that can be done to combat loneliness are individual. Um, and we're kind of getting to the end of the list I have here, but improving physical and mental health. In other words, the physical body, exercising regularly. It's interesting, hormonal and other systems in the body that are secondarily part of your emotional reactivity and emotional state are are affected by exercise. And I think it's something that again can pay double dividends. There are advantages to your physical health, obviously, but people haven't realized until more recent years just how powerful physical exercise and getting out there can mean to emotional states, depression, anxiety, and loneliness also.
Right, and exercise with a friend, my wife is a good example of this to me. She, several times a week, will get up early in the morning. If it's cold, she bundles up and she meets a friend who is a really good woman, and they go on a walk for about 3 miles several times a week, and, so that does at least 2 things. The exercise, like you've underscored here, Mark, is very important, but when you combine exercise with sociability, with a good social contact, I think the benefit is magnified a lot. And so, if you get a chance to exercise, that's great. If you have a chance to exercise along with somebody and make it a social experience, that's even better. Um, some people like to just do their own thing when they exercise. I'm kind of like that myself, but I know it's better if you can have a social experience as well. Mark, we've covered a lot of territory. Can you just give us 3 or 4 nuggets and we'll wrap this up?
Great. Well, I think that first of all, to make the comment once again, loneliness isn't just somehow being alone, but loneliness is a state. It's an emotional state. It's a physical state of the body, and it's important to recognize. It's important to respond to and not give in to. I think that there are some techniques we discussed to try to combat loneliness, to improve one's mental health generally, strengthening social connections, reaching out to others, participating in groups or volunteering, taking some social risks are among the things you can do to strengthen social connections. Really go for the connections where you're with people and you're developing relationships with people that have some greater meaning and depth to them. Changing thought patterns, negative thought patterns that lock us into a sense that we're not valuable, that no one wants to be with us. Those are things that can be challenged and rather quickly, I think, can be shown to be an artificial kind of reality that's created by a thought pattern instead of a necessary result. Practice self compassion and then taking care of yourself generally, even in when you're by yourself. Practice mindfulness, meditation are a couple techniques that can help. Keeping gratitude journals, engaging in creative activities, as we discussed. And then finally, improving physical and mental health, trying to put exercise or activity into your life, get out there, get out with other people. And again, it can take an effort, it can take some courage to take the initial step, but there can be great dividends to doing that. So, loneliness is a serious condition. There are things to do about it. I think that we all can probably enhance our sense of connectedness and meaning in our life through some of these techniques that we've discussed.
Right. That's a great summary. I might just add one thing. You've been a great example to me about how to go about this. I know you have, over the years, nurtured a lot of relationships with a lot of people that it would have been easy for you to neglect those relationships. But you've put in some effort, so I mean that's a real life. You are a real life example to me of how to not go
Thank
about
you.
a lonely life. You're welcome, and thank you. And Mark, it's been a good discussion. We'll go ahead and shut it down for now, but it's nice when people can pay attention to this. And I know you've created a website. People can get on there and give us some feedback. And I'd like to hear comments from other people. This is an important topic. So,
Very good. And as always, we're not here to substitute for your own personal caregiver. We're not here to provide direct medical instructions or options for you, but I think what we're talking about hopefully can be helpful in your consideration of leading a more full life.